The rain had been falling for 3 hours when the knock came. Elias Boone set down his coffee cup, the tin making a hollow sound against the wooden table. He'd been sitting in the same spot since sundown, watching water streak down the single window of his cabin, listening to the steady drumming on the roof he'd patched just last month. In 50 years of living, he'd grown accustomed to storms. They came and went like everything else in this forgotten corner of Montana territory, swift, harsh, and leaving little trace of their passing. But knocks on the door? Those were rare as gold in these parts. He rose slowly, joints protesting after too long in one position. The floorboards creaked under his weight, a familiar song he'd been hearing for decades. His hand moved instinctively to the Winchester propped against the wall, though he doubted any threat would announce itself so politely. "Who's there?" His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw from disuse. Days could pass without him speaking to anyone but his horse. "Please, sir," a woman's voice, barely audible above the rain. "We need shelter." The word made him pause, hand on the door latch. In all his years alone, he'd never had a woman at his door, much less one with company. The few times he'd ventured into town for supplies. Nothing more. The ladies crossed to the other side of the street. "Elias Boone," they whispered behind gloved hands. The hermit rancher who'd never taken a wife. Something must be wrong with him. Something unnatural about a man choosing solitude over family. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the yard through the window. In that brief flash, he saw them. A woman in a sodden traveling cloak, clutching a small bundle to her chest. No horse, no wagon, just two figures against the storm. He lifted the latch. The woman who stood before him might have been 30 or 40. Weather and hardship made it difficult to tell out here. Dark hair plastered to her face, eyes the color of wet earth, holding his gaze with a mixture of desperation and dignity that made something twist in his chest. The bundle in her arms shifted, and he realized it was a child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, wrapped in what looked like the woman's own shawl. "I'm sorry to trouble you," she said, water dripping from her chin. "Our wagon broke an axle 5 miles back. We saw your light. 5 miles, in this weather, carrying a child." Her dress hem was heavy with mud, boots worn through at the toes. The little girl, for he could see now it was a girl, with the same dark hair as her mother, had her face buried in the woman's neck, shoulders shaking with cold or tears or both. "Come in," he heard himself say, stepping aside. "Both of you." They entered his home like ghosts made flesh, bringing the smell of rain and earth and something else, the scent of life beyond these walls. The woman paused just inside, seeming to take in the sparse furnishings. 1 chair, 1 plate, 1 cup, everything in singular, a monument to his solitary existence. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm Martha Hale. This is Clara." Martha, a good, solid name, biblical. He'd known a Martha once, decades ago in Missouri, before he'd headed west, before he'd decided that some men were meant to walk alone. "Elias Boone," he managed, then found himself at a loss. What did one do with unexpected guests? With women and children, his social graces, never strong to begin with, had atrophied like unused muscles. "You're soaked through," he said finally, stating the obvious. There's a fire and blankets." He moved with awkward purpose, pulling the single quilt from his bed, finding a moth-eaten horse blanket in the corner. Martha took them gratefully, wrapping Clara first before tending to herself. The child's eyes, when she finally lifted her head, were gray as storm clouds and just as turbulent. "Mama," she whispered, "are we safe?" "Yes, sweetheart, the kind man is letting us warm up." Kind man. The words felt foreign applied to him. He'd been called many things: hermit, recluse, peculiar, but kind. That was new territory. He busied himself at the stove, adding wood to the dying fire, setting water to boil. His hands shook slightly as he worked, and not from cold. The cabin felt smaller with them in it, the walls pressing closer. The air itself changed. He could hear the child's breathing, quick and shallow. Could sense Martha's exhaustion in the way she swayed even while sitting. "Coffee?" he asked over his shoulder. "It's just coffee. Nothing fancy." Coffee would be a blessing. He found his spare cup, wiped it clean with his shirt tail. As he poured, he caught Martha watching him, her expression unreadable. What did she see? A man old before his time, gray threading through unkempt hair, hands scarred from decades of working alone, or something else, the carefully mended clothes, the clean-swept floor, the Bible on the shelf with its worn leather cover. "You live here alone," she said, not a question. 27 years. The number surprised even him. Had it really been so long? "That's a long time. It suits me." But even as he said it, handing her the steaming cup, he wondered if it was still true. The cabin had never felt empty before. It was simply what it was. 4 walls and a roof, shelter from storm and sun. Now, with Martha's quiet presence and Clara's small form huddled close to her mother, it felt hollow as a drum. "Where were you headed?" he asked, settling back into his chair, keeping distance between them. Safe distance. "California. My sister lives there. Said that there might be work." Martha's voice caught slightly. "My husband passed 8 months ago. Consumption." A widow. Of course. Out here. Women traveling alone with children were always running from something or toward something. Usually both. "I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded, sipping the coffee. "Henry was a good man, just not strong enough for this country." This country. Yes, it took a certain kind of strength, or perhaps a certain kind of stubbornness. Elias had both, though he'd never thought of them as virtues. They were just what kept him alive. Season after season, year after year. Clara stirred, whimpering softly. Martha set down the cup, gathering the child closer, murmuring words too low for him to catch. Mother words, comfort words, the kind he'd never heard in this space. "She can have my bed," he said abruptly. "Both of you can. I'll take the floor." Martha's eyes widened. "We couldn't. It's a bed or the barn. Take your pick." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. The first he'd seen. "You're not much for negotiation, are you, Mr. Boone?" Never had cause to learn. The rain intensified, hammering against the roof like fists. Thunder rolled across the valley, and Clara pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. Without thinking, Elias rose and went to the window, checking the latch, making sure it was secure. The gesture felt natural, necessary, protecting what was within from what was without. When he turned back, Martha was watching him again, something soft in her expression that made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't name. "The storm will likely last through tomorrow," he said, needing to fill the silence. "Creek will be too high to cross safely. We're grateful for whatever shelter you can provide." Grateful? Another word that didn't fit in his vocabulary. People weren't grateful to Elias Boone. They were wary, dismissive, sometimes mocking. The spinster of the frontier. One drunk cowboy had called him in town, laughing at his own cleverness until Elias had walked away rather than throw the punch his fists itched to deliver. He prepared his simple meal, beans and salt pork, hardtack softened in water. Nothing fit for company, especially not a lady and child. But Martha accepted it as if it were a feast. Clara ate small bites, her gray eyes never leaving his face, as if trying to puzzle out this strange man who lived alone in the wilderness. "Why?" she asked suddenly, her child's voice cutting through the comfortable silence that had fallen. "Clara," Martha admonished softly, "it's all right." Elias found himself almost smiling. "Why what? Little miss. Why do you live all alone? Don't you get scared?" The question hung in the air like smoke. How to explain to a child that the scary things weren't outside? They were the memories, the failures, the knowledge that some men simply weren't made for the life others took for granted? "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I've got good walls and a good rifle. That's enough." "Papa had a rifle," Clara said solemnly. "It didn't make him better." Martha's face crumpled slightly before she smoothed it back to calm. "That's enough questions. Sweetheart, Mr. Boone has been very kind to let us stay." But the child's words echoed in the small space. No, rifles couldn't cure consumption, couldn't bring back the dead, couldn't fill the empty spaces in a life lived too long alone. As the evening wore on, a strange peace settled over the cabin. Martha helped Clara wash her face and hands with water warmed on the stove. The simple domestic ritual transformed the space, made it something more than just shelter. When they'd settled into his bed, Martha's protests overcome by practicality, Elias found himself standing uncertainly in his own home. "Mr. Boone?" Martha's voice came soft from the corner. "Yes? Thank you, not just for the shelter, for treating us like people. Not everyone would." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and spread his bedroll by the stove. As he lay in the dark, listening to the rain and the unfamiliar sound of breathing that wasn't his own, he wondered what tomorrow would bring. The storm would pass. They always did. Martha and Clara would move on to California, to the sister and the new life waiting there, and he would remain, as he always had, in his singular existence. But for tonight, for these few hours, his cabin held more than just one lonely man and his ghosts. It held possibility, fragile as spun glass, temporary as morning dew, but real nonetheless. The door he'd opened to let them in had let something else enter too, a whisper of what might have been, what might still be, if a man were brave enough to want it, outside. The rain continued its ancient song, but inside, for the first time in 27 years, Elias Boone was not entirely alone. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. Elias woke that first morning to find Clara standing beside his bedroll, studying him with those solemn gray eyes. He'd forgotten what it was like to be watched, to be seen first thing upon waking. It made him conscious of his rumpled appearance, the silver threading through his beard, the way his bones creaked when he sat up. "Mama's still sleeping," Clara whispered, as if sharing a secret. "Then we'd best be quiet," he whispered back. Surprising himself. When had he last whispered? When had there been need? He rose carefully, moving to the stove to start the morning fire. Clara followed, a small shadow at his elbow. She watched his every movement, the way he arranged the kindling, struck the match, coaxed the flames to life. Her presence should have made him nervous, but instead he found himself explaining, keeping his voice low. "See how I stack them? Leave space for air. Fire needs to breathe, just like people. Papa showed me once," she said, but his hands shook. The consumption. Elias had seen it before. The way it ate men from inside out, left them gasping like a landed fish. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the child's matter-of-fact grief. "Would you like to help with breakfast?" Her face lit up, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Together they worked in companionable silence, Clara standing on a crate to reach the table, carefully measuring coffee grounds while Elias sliced the last of his bread. The domesticity of it struck him. How naturally she fit into the morning routine, how the cabin seemed less hollow with her small presence filling it. Martha emerged as the coffee finished brewing, her dark hair braided neatly, though her dress showed the wear of travel. She paused in the doorway of the bedroom, taking in the scene, her daughter and this strange, solitary man working side by side in the kitchen. "Clara, are you bothering Mr. Boone?" "She's helping," Elias said quickly. "Good help, too. I measured the coffee perfect. Mama, Mr. Boone said so." Martha's smile transformed her face, easing the lines of worry and grief. "Thank you," she said, and he knew she meant for more than just the coffee. They ate breakfast together, the first meal he'd shared with anyone in longer than he could remember. Clara chattered about the horses she'd seen on their journey, about her aunt in California who had orange trees in her yard, about the doll she'd had to leave behind when they sold everything to make the trip. Elias found himself listening, really listening, to her child's view of the world. "Mr. Boone," Martha said as they cleared the dishes, "I noticed your roof needs patching. The leak in the corner? I could help, if you'd like, as payment for room and board. He started to protest. What did a woman know about patching roofs? But something in her expression stopped him. Pride. He recognized it, having worn it like armor his whole life. If the rain stops, he conceded. But the rain didn't stop. It fell in sheets, turning the yard to mud, swelling the creek until it roared like something alive. They were trapped together, 3 souls in a cabin meant for one. The first day passed in awkward politeness. Martha mended a tear in Clara's dress while Elias worked on repairing a broken harness. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers who didn't know the steps. But by evening, when Clara asked for a story and Martha began to tell one about a princess in a tower, Elias found himself adding details: what kind of horse the prince rode, what the dragon looked like. Clara's delighted laughter filled the cabin like music. The second day brought a different rhythm. Martha insisted on taking over the cooking, producing miracles from his meager supplies. Biscuits light as clouds, beans seasoned with wild herbs she'd spotted from the window and asked him to fetch. The cabin filled with smells that made it seem like home instead of just shelter. "You cook like someone who's fed a family," he said, watching her work. 5 brothers. She admitted. "Mama died when I was 12. I learned quick." While she cooked, Elias found himself fixing things he'd let slide: the wobbly table leg, the door that stuck, the shelf that had been threatening to collapse for months. Clara followed him everywhere, handing him tools, asking endless questions. "Why don't you have any pictures?" "Never had anyone to take pictures of." "Why don't you have more chairs?" "Never had anyone to sit in them." "Why don't you have a wife?" That one stopped him cold. Hammer suspended mid-swing. Martha looked up from the stove, flour dusting her hands, waiting to see how he'd answer. "Some men aren't meant for wives," he said finally. "Why not?" He set down the hammer, choosing his words carefully. "You know how some horses run better alone than in a team? It's like that." Clara considered this. "But even alone horses come back to the barn at night. They don't stay alone forever." From the mouths of babes. He had no answer for that, so he resumed his work, aware of Martha's thoughtful gaze following him. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep, Martha joined him by the fire. She'd been sleeping in his bed with Clara while he took the floor, but tonight she seemed restless, unable to settle. "I should tell you," she said quietly. "In case you're wondering, Henry, my husband, he was a good man, a teacher, back in Ohio. He thought we'd find something better out west, thought the dry air would help his lungs." She stared into the flames. "He was wrong about his lungs, but right about the better. Even with everything, I wouldn't go back." "The West changes people," Elias agreed. "Makes them into what they really are, for better or worse." "What did it make you?" He considered the question. "Honest, I suppose. Can't lie to yourself out here. Not for long. The land won't let you." "And what's your truth?" "Elias Boone." His name on her lips sounded different somehow. Softer. "That I'm a man who knows how to be alone." "That's not a truth," she said gently. "That's a skill. There's a difference." They sat in silence, listening to the rain and the fire and Clara's soft breathing. The space between them felt charged with possibility, like the air before lightning strikes. The third day dawned still gray, but with rain falling softer, gentler. Elias knew it would clear soon, knew the creek would drop, knew his unexpected guests would leave. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest, a weight he didn't care to examine. Martha was at the stove when he woke, humming quietly. She'd taken to the cabin like she belonged there, finding ways to make it more comfortable. A wildflower in a cup on the table, the windows cleaned to let in more light. His few possessions arranged with care instead of mere utility. "I've been thinking," she said without turning around. "About what you said, some horses running better alone. And I think maybe you've been running so long, you've forgotten what you're running from." Before he could respond, Clara burst between them, excited about something she'd seen from the window. A deer, she claimed, with the biggest antlers ever. They spent the morning watching for wildlife, Elias pointing out tracks in the mud, teaching her the signs he'd learned in his decades of solitude. But all the while, Martha's words echoed in his mind. What had he been running from? The memory rose unbidden. The girl in Missouri, sweet Mary Thorne with her cornflower eyes and gentle laugh. How she'd waited while he built up courage to court her. How he'd waited too long, paralyzed by fear of rejection, and watched her marry another. How he'd headed west the day after their wedding, vowing never to risk that kind of pain again. 30 years of running from a hurt that might not have happened if he'd just been brave enough to speak. That afternoon, the sun broke through, the world outside sparkled, washed clean. Martha began gathering their few possessions, preparing to leave. Clara protested. Couldn't they stay just one more day? But Martha was firm. They'd imposed enough on Mr. Boone's kindness. It wasn't an imposition, Elias heard himself say. It was. He struggled for the word. What had these 3 days been? An interruption? A disruption? No, a glimpse. A glimpse of what life could hold beyond mere survival. It was good to have you here, he finished lamely. Martha smiled, that soft smile that made something in his chest constrict. It was good to be here. They prepared to leave as the sun peeked through the clouds. Elias found himself moving slowly, reluctantly, as if he could delay their departure by taking longer to help them gather their things. He packed provisions for their journey, dried meat, hardtack, apples from his root cellar. This is too much, Martha protested. It's practical, he said gruffly. You've got 5 miles of mud to wade through before you reach your wagon. As they stood at the door, ready to leave, Clara tugged on his pants leg. Mr. Boone, will you be lonely again when we go? The question hung in the air like morning mist. Martha touched her daughter's shoulder, but her eyes were on Elias, waiting for his answer. I suppose I will, he admitted, crouching down to Clara's level. But that's not your worry, little miss. You just think about those orange trees in California. Clara threw her arms around his neck, a quick, fierce hug that left him stunned. When had anyone last embraced him? He couldn't remember. Thank you, Martha said softly, for everything, for showing us that there are still good men in this world, for giving us shelter, for... She paused, then stepped forward and kissed his weathered cheek, light as a butterfly landing, for reminding me that kindness still exists. She finished. Then they were gone, walking across his muddy yard toward the road, toward their broken wagon and their journey west and their new life in California. Elias stood in his doorway, watching until they disappeared over the rise. Clara turning back once to wave. The cabin, when he finally closed the door, felt emptier than it ever had. The cup with the wildflower mocked him from the table. Clara's small footprints were still visible on the floor. The bed where they'd slept still held the faint scent of Martha's hair. For the first time in 27 years, Elias Boone understood the difference between being alone and being lonely. The cabin hadn't felt empty before because he hadn't known what it was like to have it filled. Now the absence pressed against him from all sides, a physical ache that no amount of work could ease. He sat at his table, in his single chair, and stared at the door that had opened to let in more than just 2 souls seeking shelter from the rain. It had let in possibility and warmth, and the dangerous knowledge that his carefully constructed solitude might not be the fortress he'd believed it to be. Outside, the sun shone on a world washed new. But inside, Elias Boone sat with the echoes of laughter and life, wondering if 3 days could change the course of 30 years, wondering if a man who'd forgotten how to hope might remember how to try. The wildflower in the cup died after 2 days, but Elias couldn't bring himself to throw it out. A week had passed since Martha and Clara left. 7 days that felt longer than the previous 7 years. He'd returned to his routines, morning coffee, checking the livestock, mending fences, but everything felt off-kilter, like trying to walk with one boot missing. The cabin seemed to echo with absent voices, phantom laughter, the ghost of small feet pattering across the floor. On the 8th day, he saw riders approaching from the east. His hand went instinctively to his rifle, then relaxed. 3 riders, moving slow, one smaller than the others. As they drew closer, his heart did something it hadn't done in decades. It leaped. Martha sat atop a borrowed mare, Clara in front of her, both looking trail-worn but whole. The third rider was a man Elias didn't recognize, tall and lean with a marshal's star glinting on his vest. "Mr. Boone," Martha said as they reached his gate. Her voice was steady, but he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. "I'm sorry to impose again, but no imposition," he said quickly, already moving to help them down. "What happened?" "Wagons beyond repair," the marshal said, dismounting with easy grace. "Found these ladies stranded at Miller's Creek. Name's Tom Morrison, out of Billings." Elias shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip, the direct gaze. An honest lawman, then. They still existed. Rare as they were. "Mrs. Hale says you helped them before," Morrison continued. "I was heading this way anyhow. Seemed right to see them somewhere safe." Safe, yes. Elias supposed his cabin was that, but as he helped Martha down, feeling how she trembled slightly despite her composed expression, he wondered if safe was enough. "Come inside," he said. "All of you. Coffee's on." Clara ran ahead, bursting through the door like she belonged there. "Mr. Boone, our wagon broke all the way." The wheel came right off, and all our things fell in the mud, and Mama cried, but she said she didn't, but I saw her. "Clara," Martha said softly, a flush rising in her cheeks. "It's all right," Elias said. "Tears are nothing to be ashamed of. I'd cry too if I lost my wagon in the mud." Over coffee, he'd had to borrow a cup from his neighbor 2 miles away. Anticipating more visitors after Martha's stay, the story emerged. The wagon had been in worse shape than they'd thought. The axle had split completely at Miller's Creek, sending their possessions tumbling into the water. What little money Martha had saved for the journey was gone, lost in the current along with most of their clothes and supplies. "I've sent word to my sister," Martha said, hands wrapped around the tin cup like it could warm more than just her fingers. "But even if she sends money, it won't arrive for weeks, maybe months." "You're welcome here," Elias said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "Both of you. Until you can figure out what's next." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's good of you. Boone, I'll let folks in town know. In case anyone's looking for work. Mrs. Hale's got skills. Cooking, sewing, teaching. Someone might have need." The marshal left after supper, promising to check back in a few weeks. Elias watched him go with mixed feelings. Part of him wanted to ask the man to stay, to help navigate these uncharted waters. But a larger part, the part that had learned to read Martha's quiet pride, knew she'd be mortified by too much fuss. That night, as they settled into the same arrangement as before, Martha and Clara in the bed, Elias by the stove, Martha spoke into the darkness. "I keep imposing on your kindness." "It's not kindness," he replied before he could stop himself. "It's practical. Can't have you and the little one sleeping rough." "Is that what you tell yourself?" He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was too large, too dangerous to speak aloud. The truth was that the week without them had taught him something his 30 years of solitude hadn't. That an empty life wasn't the same as a simple one. That surviving wasn't the same as living. Days fell into a new rhythm. Martha insisted on earning their keep, taking over the cooking and household management with an efficiency that both amazed and shamed him. How had he lived so long with so little comfort? Under her hands, the cabin transformed. Curtains appeared at the windows, sewn from flour sacks. The floors gleamed from proper scrubbing. Meals became events instead of mere fuel. Clara, for her part, appointed herself his assistant in all outdoor work. She collected eggs with solemn concentration, fed the chickens while conducting elaborate conversations with them, helped him milk the cow with hands too small for the task but determined to try. "Why don't you name them?" she asked one morning, gesturing at the chickens. "They're chickens," he said. "Don't need names. Everything needs a name. Otherwise, how do they know who they are?" Child logic, but it stuck with him. That afternoon, he found himself calling the red hen Rosie, just to see Clara smile. In the evenings, they fell into a comfortable routine. Martha would work on sewing. She'd managed to save her needles and thread, and neighbors had begun bringing mending work once word spread of her skill. Elias would whittle or repair harnesses, while Clara practiced her letters on a slate he'd traded for in town. Henry was teaching her. Martha explained that first evening. "I've tried to keep it up, but—" "I could help," Elias offered, then wondered at his own boldness. "I mean, I can read, write some, enough to help with basics." Martha's smile was worth the vulnerability of admitting his limited education. That would be wonderful. So he became Clara's tutor, teaching her the alphabet and simple words. In return, she taught him to see his familiar world through new eyes. Everything was a wonder to her. The way hawks circled in the sky, how bread dough rose, why snow was cold but flour wasn't even though they looked the same. "You're good with her," Martha said one evening, watching as he helped Clara sound out words. "She's easy to be good with," he replied. "Doesn't judge, doesn't expect anything except honesty. Children are like that. They see through to the truth of people." Martha paused in her sewing. "She's taken to you. Be careful with that trust. Elias, it's fragile as spun glass. I know." And he did. The weight of Clara's trust, of her small hand in his as they walked to check fences, of her absolute faith that he would keep them safe. It terrified him more than any winter storm or summer drought. One evening, 3 weeks into their stay, the conversation turned to deeper waters. Clara had fallen asleep early, worn out from helping Elias repair the chicken coop. Martha and Elias sat by the fire, comfortable in the silence that had grown between them. "Tell me about Henry," Elias said suddenly. "If you want, if it's not too painful." Martha's smile was sad but not bitter. "It's all right. Pain means it mattered." She stared into the fire. He was gentle, too gentle for this world. Maybe he loved books more than anything, except Clara. Used to read to her every night, even when he could barely breathe. She told him about their courtship in Ohio, how Henry had won her with poetry and promises of adventure, how the consumption had started slow, just a cough that wouldn't go away, how they'd spent everything on doctors before deciding to risk it all on the Western cure that never came. "He died thinking he'd failed us," she said quietly. "Left his wife and daughter with nothing but dreams and debt. I couldn't convince him otherwise." "He didn't fail," Elias said firmly. "He gave you Clara. He gave her a father's love, even if brief. That's more than some get." Martha looked at him then, really looked. "What about you? Never married. You said, never courted?" The old shame rose, but weaker now, diluted by years and perspective. Once, maybe, there was a girl, Mary Thorne, pretty as morning sunshine and twice as bright. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling. "I was young, tongue-tied, kept thinking I'd speak up tomorrow, next week, next month. Then one Sunday she married Tom Morrison, different Tom Morrison than the Marshal, and moved to California. Did you love her? I thought I did. Now I think I love the idea of her. Never knew her well enough to love the truth of her." He met Martha's eyes. "Been hiding behind that hurt for 30 years. Fool thing to do." "We're all fools when it comes to the heart," Martha said softly. "The lucky ones learn from it. The rest just keep running." "Which are you?" Still figuring that out. She rose, smoothing her skirts. "But I'm tired of running. Clara needs stability. Roots, maybe not orange trees in California, but something real, something lasting." That night, Elias lay awake long after the house had settled into sleep. He thought about roots, about running, about the difference between loneliness and solitude. He thought about Mary Thorne, pretty as morning sunshine, and realized he couldn't quite remember her face, but Martha's face, tired, determined, beautiful in its strength, that he could see clearly even in the darkness. The next morning brought news from town. Morrison had been as good as his word. The general store owner's wife needed help with the household while she recovered from childbirth. It would mean Martha spending days in town, but the pay was fair and steady. "It's perfect," Martha said, reading the letter. "I can save enough to get us to California by spring." California. The word dropped like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Of course, this had always been temporary. Elias had known that, hadn't he? Had told himself so a dozen times a day. "That's good," he managed. "Good news." But Clara's face fell. "I don't want to go to California anymore. I like it here. With the chickens. And Rosie. And Mr. Boone." "Clara, we can't just leave. Who will help with the eggs? Who will make sure Mr. Boone eats proper meals? He'll go back to just coffee and hardtack and being all alone." The child's words hung in the air like an accusation. Martha's face colored. "Clara, that's enough. Mr. Boone managed fine before we came along, but he's happier now." Clara insisted with the devastating honesty of childhood. "I can tell." He smiles more. He whistles when he works. He doesn't look sad when he thinks no one's watching. Elias felt exposed, laid bare by a 5-year-old's observations. Had he been that transparent, that obvious in his growing contentment? "Little miss," he said gently, crouching to her level. "Your mama's doing what's best for you. California's got opportunities, better schools, more chances for a good life. But what about you?" The question he'd been avoiding, voiced by the person least equipped to understand the complexity of the answer. What about him? What about the man who'd learned to live again in the presence of these two souls? What about the life that had been enough before, but now felt hollow as a gourd? "I'll be fine," he lied, and tasted ashes in his mouth. "Always have been." But that night, as he taught Clara new words by candlelight while Martha mended shirts for townfolk, Elias allowed himself to imagine. What if they stayed? What if this became permanent instead of a way station? What if he stopped being the man who'd let chances pass by and became the man who grabbed hold with both hands? The thought terrified him more than any blizzard, any drought, any danger he'd faced in his 50 years. But beneath the terror, small as a seed but stubborn as prairie grass, hope began to grow. The riders came at dusk, 5 of them, moving with the deliberate pace of men who knew their business. Elias saw them from the barn, where he'd been teaching Clara how to properly curry a horse. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped against the wall. Old habits dying hard. Something about the way they rode, spread out, watchful, made the hair on his neck rise. "Clara," he said quietly, "go inside. Find your mama." "But we're not done with now. Little miss." She must have heard something in his voice because she went without further protest. Small feet flying across the yard. Elias stepped out of the barn, rifle casual in his hands but ready. In his years of solitude, he'd learned to read trouble like weather signs. The lead rider was a big man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of pale eyes that looked through people rather than at them. The family resemblance to Henry was clear in the set of his jaw, the shape of his nose. This would be the brother-in-law Martha had mentioned only once, briefly, when explaining why California seemed safer than staying in Montana. "Elias Boone?" The man didn't wait for confirmation. "Name's Samuel Hale. I've come for my brother's child. Evening to you too," Elias said mildly. "Bit late for social calls." Samuel dismounted, his men staying in their saddles. Smart tactics, height advantage, mobility if needed. These weren't casual visitors. "No call. Family business. The girl belongs with blood. Not with whatever arrangement my sister-in-law's made here." His pale eyes swept over the modest cabin, the well-tended yard. Living in sin with a stranger. What would poor Henry think? He'd think his daughter was safe and cared for. Martha's voice came from the doorway. She stood straight-backed, chin high, but Elias could see the tremor in her hands. "Which is more than she'd be with you, Samuel. Now, Martha, no need for unpleasantness. You're clearly not thinking straight, grief-addled and all. But Clara needs proper raising, a stable home, male guidance from family, not from some hermit you've taken up with. Mr. Boone has shown us more kindness in 2 months than you showed Henry in 10 years, Martha said. Where were you when he was sick? When we were selling everything to pay for medicine? When your brother was dying and asking for you? Samuel's face darkened. I offered to take the girl then. It was you who refused, too proud to accept help. You offered to take her as unpaid labor for your ranch, a 5-year-old child. Samuel, to earn her keep. You said. The truth hung ugly in the evening air. Elias understood now, the brother who'd seen opportunity in tragedy, who viewed his niece as free labor wrapped in the guise of family duty. Mr. Hale, Elias said, shifting the rifle slightly, just enough to be noticed. Seems like Mrs. Hale has made her wishes clear. The girl's happy here, fed, educated, cared for. That should be enough for any uncle who truly cares about her welfare. Samuel's eyes narrowed. And what's your interest, Boone? Man your age, never married, suddenly taking in a widow and child? People in town are talking. Let them talk. Elias felt a cold calm settle over him. The same feeling he got before a storm. Doesn't change the facts. Martha and Clara are welcome here as long as they choose to stay. Your brother trusted his wife to make decisions for their daughter. I figure I'll do the same. You figure wrong. Samuel gestured to his men. Judge Morrison in Billings, different Morrison than the marshal, is my wife's cousin. He'll see things proper. Grant me guardianship of my brother's offspring, seeing as how her mother's taken up with unsuitable company. You wouldn't dare, Martha breathed. Already done. Papers filed this morning. Sheriff will be out tomorrow to collect the girl, all legal-like. Samuel's smile was cold as winter wind. Unless you want to be reasonable. Come back with me now, both of you. Work off Henry's debts. Oh yes, I bought those from the doctor. Family helps family. After all, 5 years should cover it. Then you're free to go wherever you please. 5 years. Clara would be 10. Her childhood spent in servitude to an uncle who saw her as property. The thought made something fierce rise in Elias's chest. There's another option, he heard himself say. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been sleeping for 30 years. She could stay here, with her mother, as my wife. The world seemed to stop. Martha's sharp intake of breath was the only sound. Even the evening birds had gone quiet. Samuel barked a laugh. You, Mary, the hermit of Copper Creek suddenly wants a wife? He looked between them, understanding dawning. Oh, this is rich. You think marrying her will solve this? A hasty wedding won't impress Judge Morrison. No, Elias agreed. But it'll make me Clara's legal father, and in Montana territory. A father's rights supersede an uncle's. It was true. He'd learned that much from his few dealings with legal matters over land disputes. Marriage would make him Clara's stepfather, with all the legal protection that entailed. Martha, he said, not looking at her, keeping his eyes on Samuel and his men. This isn't how I would have, but if it keeps Clara safe. You'd do that? Her voice was barely a whisper. Marry me to protect her? I'd do whatever needs doing. Samuel's face had gone red as a sunset. This is ridiculous. You can't just... I will. If Martha agrees... Now he did look at her, trying to convey everything he couldn't say in front of these men. That it wasn't just about protecting Clara. That the past 2 months had taught him what he'd been missing. That the thought of them leaving had become unbearable. But also that he understood if she said no. If this was too much, too fast, too strange. Martha stepped forward, moving to stand beside him. When? Tonight. Tom Morrison, the marshal, can officiate. He's got the authority. This is absurd. Samuel sputtered. You can't just decide to marry because... Because what? Martha turned on him, fierce as a mother wolf. Because you're trying to steal my daughter? Because you see her as free labor? Because you think grief makes me weak? She reached out, took Elias's free hand. Her fingers were cold but steady. Yes, I'll marry him. Tonight, and you'll never touch my daughter. Samuel's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped as Elias raised the rifle slightly. I'd think careful on that. Elias said quietly, You're on my land, making threats against my intended and her daughter. The marshal's already got his eye on you from that cattle business last spring. Don't add to your troubles." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Samuel wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over. Judge Morrison will hear about this sham marriage. We'll see what he thinks about a union born of desperation." "You do that," Elias said. "And while you're at it, explain to him why you're so keen on taking a child from her mother. Explain about the debts you bought up. Explain about 5 years of unpaid labor. See how that sits with his sense of justice." Samuel and his men rode off in a cloud of dust and curses. Elias waited until they were out of sight before lowering the rifle, suddenly aware that his hands were shaking. "Elias," Martha began. "We need to get to town," he said, not ready for whatever she might say, "before Samuel thinks to cause trouble there." "Elias, wait!" She caught his arm. "You don't have to do this. We could leave tonight. Head somewhere else." "Where?" He turned to face her fully. "Where would you go that he couldn't follow? With what money? And Clara, you want her spending her life looking over her shoulder? But marriage, Elias, that's forever. You can't just—" "Can't I?" The words came out rougher than intended. "Martha, these past 2 months." He stopped, started again. "I'm no good with words. Never have been, but I know this. The thought of you leaving was already killing me. The thought of Samuel taking Clara, of you both being under his thumb." "So you'd sacrifice your freedom? Your solitude?" He laughed, short and harsh. "What freedom? What solitude? You've ruined both already." At her stricken look, he hurried on. "No, that's good. That's the best thing that's happened to me in 30 years. Martha, I can't offer you poetry like Henry. Can't offer you much beyond this cabin and hard work and my promise to keep you both safe. But if you'll have me—" Clara appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Are the bad men gone?" "Yes, sweetheart," Martha said, not looking away from Elias. "They're gone. I heard shouting. Are we in trouble?" Elias knelt down to her level. "No trouble, little miss, but we need to go to town. See the marshal." "Why?" He looked up at Martha, question in his eyes. She nodded, a small smile breaking through the worry. "Because," Martha said, smoothing her daughter's hair, "Mr. Boone and I are getting married." Clara's squeal of delight could probably be heard in the next county. She threw herself at Elias, nearly knocking him over. "Really? You'll be my papa? My real papa?" "If you'll have me," he said, throat tight. "Of course I will." "Can I call you Papa now? Can I? And we'll stay here forever and help with the chickens and learn more words and breathe, little miss." Elias laughed, the sound foreign to his own ears. When had he last laughed like that? One thing at a time. They hitched the wagon in record time, Clara chattering non-stop about weddings and families and whether the chickens could attend. Martha was quiet, but when Elias helped her up to the seat, she squeezed his hand. "Are you sure?" she asked one more time. "I've never been sure of anything in my life," he admitted, but that's never stopped things from being right. The ride to town was swift, urgency pushing them forward. Elias's mind raced with the implications of what he was about to do. 50 years of solitude, ended in a single night. A wife, a daughter, a family. The words felt strange, impossible, wonderful. "Elias," Martha said softly as the lights of town appeared, "I want you to know, this isn't just about protection. These months, you've been—" "I know," he said, because he did. The same feeling had been growing in him, unnamed but undeniable. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." Together? Together. The marshal was at the saloon, off duty but willing when they explained. His face went hard when he heard about Samuel's threats. "That man's been circling like a buzzard," Morrison said. "Glad you're taking steps. You sure about this? Boone?" Elias looked at Martha, standing proud despite everything, at Clara bouncing with excitement, at the life that had suddenly opened before him like a door in the rain. "Never been more sure," he said, and meant it. The ceremony would be simple. Witnesses gathered from whoever was handy. Vows spoken in the marshal's office. Not what Martha deserved, not what he would have chosen given time. But as she took his arm, as Clara grabbed his other hand, Elias realized it didn't matter. What mattered was the choice. The decision to stop running, to stop hiding, to risk everything for the chance at something more than survival. "Ready?" Morrison asked. Elias looked at his soon-to-be family, feeling 50 years of ice begin to thaw. "Ready," he said, and stepped forward into his new life. The marshal's office smelled of leather and lamp oil, a cramped space that suddenly held Elias's entire future. Tom Morrison cleared papers from his desk. Movements efficient but gentle. "Need witnesses. 2 besides me." He glanced out the window. "Mrs. Patterson's at the Mercantile, and there's Joe Henley from the livery. Both good folks who'll keep quiet if asked." "I don't want quiet," Martha said, surprising them all. "Let Samuel hear. Let the whole town know. I'm not ashamed." Morrison smiled. "That's the spirit, but might be wise to keep it simple tonight. Tell folks proper in daylight. Samuel's got friends who drink at the saloon." While Morrison fetched the witnesses, Elias found himself alone with Martha and Clara in the small office. Clara had discovered a wanted poster and was sounding out the letters, leaving the adults in charged silence. "Martha," he began, but she held up a hand. "I know what you're going to say, that this isn't how either of us imagined it, that you're giving up your whole life for us." She met his eyes. "But you're wrong. You're not giving up anything. You're gaining what you've been missing. And you, what are you gaining besides a rough cabin and a man who doesn't know the first thing about being a husband?" She moved closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "I'm gaining a man who stood up to 5 riders for us, who teaches my daughter to read, who looks at us like we're precious instead of burdens." Her voice dropped. "Who makes me feel safe for the first time since Henry got sick. Martha, and if you tell me one more time you're not good with words, Elias Boone, I might have to call off this wedding." But she was smiling, that soft smile that transformed her face. The door opened, admitting Morrison with Mrs. Patterson and Joe Henley. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman with silver hair, took one look at the scene and clasped her hands together. "Martha Hale." "Is this what I think it is?" "Soon to be Martha Boone," Martha said quietly. "If you'll stand witness." "Of course, dear, though I must say, Mr. Boone, it's about time. Whole town's been wondering when you'd come to your senses." Elias felt heat rise in his cheeks. "The whole town?" Joe Henley, a man of few words and many horses, just nodded. "Seen you in town more these past 2 months than the past 2 years. Man changes like that usually means a woman's involved. Good woman, in this case." "Are we ready, then?" Morrison asked, pulling out a worn Bible. "This won't be fancy, but it'll be legal. And binding." They arranged themselves in front of the desk, Clara insisting on standing between them. Elias had a moment of panic. What was he doing? He knew nothing of marriage, of family life, of being a father. But then Martha took his hand, her fingers steady and warm, and the panic faded. "Dearly beloved," Morrison began, then stopped. "Well, that seems too formal for folks I've known this long. Let me just say this. Marriage is a covenant, a promise. It's saying to each other in the world that you're choosing to face whatever comes together instead of alone. Like when the chickens huddle together in a storm?" Clara piped up. Morrison smiled. "Exactly like that. Little one, now, I don't have fancy vows written down, so I'll ask you plain. Elias Boone, do you take Martha Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife? To protect, provide for, and cherish in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live?" Elias looked at Martha, seeing not just the woman who'd knocked on his door in the rain, but the one who'd brought light into his darkness. "I do, with everything I have." "Martha Hale, do you take Elias Boone to be your lawfully wedded husband? To stand beside, support, and cherish, in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Martha said, voice clear and certain. "Gladly," And Clara, Morrison said, kneeling to her level. Do you promise to help make this family work? To be a good daughter and bring joy to this house? I promise, Clara said solemnly. Can I help with the chickens every day now? Every day, Elias assured her. Then by the authority vested in me by Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Morrison stood, grinning. Boone, you may kiss your bride. Elias froze. In all the rush, he hadn't thought about this part. He'd never, not properly, not in front of people. Martha saved him, rising on her toes to press a soft kiss to his cheek. We'll practice the rest later, she whispered. And Mrs. Patterson chuckled. Sign here, Morrison said, producing the marriage certificate. Both of you, Mrs. Patterson, Joe, you too. As Elias wrote his name next to Martha's, the reality hit him. He was married. He had a wife, a daughter. The solitary life he'd known for 50 years was gone, replaced by something terrifying and wonderful. Congratulations, Mrs. Patterson said, surprising him with a hug. You've got yourself a treasure, Mr. Boone. You treat her right. Yes, ma'am. Joe shook his hand. You'll need a bigger wagon, family wagon. Come by tomorrow. We'll work something out. Family wagon. The words echoed as they prepared to leave. Outside. The night had grown cold, stars brilliant in the clear sky. Clara danced ahead to their wagon, too excited to feel the chill. Elias, Morrison said quietly, pulling him aside. Samuel won't take this well. Watch your back. Keep the rifle handy. And if you need help, I'll manage. Not alone. Not anymore. Morrison glanced at Martha and Clara. That's what family means. You've got people now. Boone, remember that. The ride home was quiet, Clara having exhausted herself with excitement and fallen asleep against her mother. Martha held her close, humming softly. Elias drove in silence, mind spinning with the magnitude of change. Are you regretting it already? Martha asked softly. No, just thinking. About how empty that cabin's going to feel when you're not in it. She shifted closer on the bench. Then it's good we'll be in it. Martha, I need to say this. He kept his eyes on the road, easier than looking at her. I'm not Henry. I don't have gentle ways or book learning. I don't know poetry or pretty words. I'm just a man who spent most of his life alone and might not know how to change. I'm not asking you to be Henry, Martha said. I'm asking you to be Elias, the man who opens doors in storms, who teaches little girls about chickens, who stands up to bullies even when outnumbered. That all? No. Her hand found his arm. Also the man who looks at me like I'm not just a burden to bear or a problem to solve, but like I'm worth something. Do you know how long it's been since anyone looked at me that way? They reached the cabin. Home now. Truly home. Just as the moon rose full. Elias carried Clara inside, laying her gently in the bed that had been his just hours ago. Everything was changing, rearranging itself around these two souls he'd pledged to protect. Martha had lit the lamp, its warm glow filling the space. She stood uncertainly by the table, the first awkwardness between them since the ceremony. I'll take the floor, he said quickly. Like before, until you're comfortable with... Elias. She moved toward him. We're married, whatever that means to us. However we define it. We decide together, but you're not sleeping on the floor in your own home. Our home. Yes, our home. She smiled, shy but determined. We'll figure it out, all of it, together. He nodded, throat tight with emotion he couldn't name. I'll bank the fire. As he moved about the familiar tasks, checking the door, banking the coals, making sure the rifle was within reach, Martha readied for bed. The domestic sounds, rustling fabric and pouring water, made the cabin feel full in ways it never had. When he turned from the fire, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, hair loose around her shoulders, still in her traveling dress. I don't have proper night clothes, she said. Lost them at the creek. Tomorrow we'll go to town, get what you need. Both of you. With what money? I've got some saved. Not much, but enough. He sat in his chair, pulling off his boots. "Martha, about Clara calling me Papa. Does it bother you?" "No, just the opposite. But I want to earn it, want to be worthy of it." Martha rose, crossing to kneel beside his chair. In the lamplight, her face was soft, younger than her years of hardship should allow. "You already have. The moment you stood between her and Samuel, you earned it. That was just instinct." "Exactly. Your instinct was to protect her. That's what fathers do." She took his rough hands in her smaller ones. "Elias, I need you to understand something. I didn't marry you just for protection. These past months, watching you with Clara, seeing how you've opened your life to us, I've come to care for you. Truly." The words hung between them, precious and fragile. Elias turned his hands to hold hers properly, marveling at how small they felt, how strong. "I'm no good at pretty speeches," he said slowly. "But Martha, you've brought something back to life in me I thought was dead. When you leave a piece of ground fallow too long, it forgets how to grow things. You and Clara, you're like rain after drought. You're making things grow I didn't know were still seeds." She squeezed his hands. "That might be the prettiest speech I ever heard." A sound from the bed made them both turn. Clara sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Are you married now? For real?" "For real," Martha assured her. "Good. Does that mean I can call Mr. Boone Papa now?" Elias felt his heart constrict. "If you want to, little miss." Clara scrambled out of bed, patting over in her bare feet to throw her arms around his neck. "Papa, my Papa." She pulled back, serious. "You won't leave like my first Papa did?" "No, sweetheart. I'm here to stay. Promise? Promise." "Good. Can we have flapjacks for breakfast, to celebrate?" Martha laughed, the sound filling the cabin like music. "Yes, we can have flapjacks." After Clara was settled back in bed with whispered good nights and forehead kisses from both her parents, plural. What a wonder. Martha and Elias found themselves alone again. "We should rest," Martha said. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Samuel won't give up easy. No, but we'll face him together." She moved toward the bed, then paused. "Elias, thank you for all of it, for giving us more than shelter, for giving us a home." As they settled for sleep, Martha in the bed with Clara, Elias on a pallet nearby but not on the hard floor, he lay awake listening to their breathing. His cabin, his life, his very self had been transformed in the space of hours. Outside, wind sang through the pines, the same song it had sung for 27 years. But inside, everything had changed. The loneliness that had been his constant companion was gone, replaced by something warm and alive and infinitely precious. He'd stood before witnesses and God and made promises he only half understood. But as sleep finally took him, one truth settled into his bones. He would spend whatever years remained to him keeping those promises, protecting this family that had somehow become his, cherishing the gift of their presence in his life. The last thought before dreams claimed him was of Clara's arms around his neck, her voice saying Papa like it was the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps it was. The stranger arrived 3 weeks after the wedding, riding a horse that had seen better days and wearing clothes that spoke of hard traveling. Elias was splitting wood when he saw the rider approaching, Martha hanging wash while Clara fed the chickens. It had become their morning rhythm, comfortable, domestic, everything he'd never known he wanted. But something about the rider's posture, the way he sat his horse despite obvious exhaustion, made Elias set down his axe and reach for the rifle. "Martha," he called quietly, "take Clara inside." She looked up, read his face, and moved without question. This too had become part of their rhythm, trusting each other's instincts, protecting what they'd built. The rider stopped at the gate, hands visible on the saddle horn. "Elias Boone? Who's asking?" "Name's Calvin Rowe." The man swayed slightly, caught himself. "Been a long time. Boone, 20 years, give or take." The name hit Elias like a physical blow. Calvin Rowe. Images flooded back. A younger man, desperate, making foolish choices. The trial, the verdict, 20 years hard labor for attempted murder and cattle theft. You're out, Elias said, stating the obvious while his mind raced. Month ago. Served my full sentence. Every last day. Calvan's laugh was bitter as winter wind. 20 years. Boone, because you couldn't mind your own business. You were stealing cattle, shooting at anyone who tried to stop you. I was trying to survive. Had a family to feed. Same as anyone. Calvan dismounted slowly, grimacing. But you had to play hero. Had to be the one to track me down. Bring me in. Martha appeared in the doorway despite his earlier warning, Clara peering out behind her skirts. Calvan's eyes tracked to them, something shifting in his expression. Well now, heard tell in town you'd gone and got married, the hermit of Copper Creek, taking a wife. His smile was unpleasant. Pretty woman. And a child too. You've built yourself quite a life while I rotted in prison. What do you want? Row? Justice. The word came out sharp, honed by decades of resentment. You took 20 years from me. My wife died thinking I'd abandoned her. My boys grew up without a father, all because you had to be righteous. You made your choices. And you made yours. Question is, are you prepared to live with the consequences? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elias felt Martha's tension, heard Clara's small gasp. His family. The word still felt new, precious. And now threatened by a ghost from the past. State your business or move on, Elias said evenly. This is my land, my home, your home. Calvan tested the words. Yes, I can see that. Cozy, peaceful, everything a man could want. He remounted with difficulty. I'll be around. Boone, got nowhere else to be. No one waiting for me. Plenty of time to think about balance, about what's owed. He rode off without looking back, leaving silence in his wake. Papa? Clara's voice was small. Who was that man? Someone from a long time ago, Elias said, not taking his eyes off the retreating figure. Nothing for you to worry about. But Martha's face said she understood the worry was just beginning. That night, after Clara was asleep, they talked in low voices by the fire. Tell me, Martha said simply. So he did. The whole story. The gang of rustlers that had plagued the territory 20 years back, led by Calvin Rowe. How they'd grown bold, violent. How one rancher had been shot trying to protect his herd. How the territorial governor had put out a call for men to track them down. I wasn't trying to be a hero, Elias said, staring into the flames. Just seemed wrong, letting them terrorize folks. I knew the backcountry better than most. Tracked them for 2 weeks, finally cornered them in a box canyon. And Calvin? Came out shooting, nearly took my head off with his first shot. He touched the scar hidden by his hairline. But I was better positioned. Got him in the shoulder, knocked him off his horse. The others scattered, but I brought him in. You did the right thing, maybe, but right and easy aren't the same. He had a family. Like he said, wife and 2 boys. They left the territory after the trial. Heard she died of fever a few years later. He met Martha's eyes. Now he's back, and I've got something to lose. Martha moved closer, taking his hand. We've got something to lose, and something to protect, together. The next days passed in watchful tension. Elias found himself checking the horizon constantly, rifle always within reach. He taught Martha to shoot, setting up targets behind the barn. I know the basics, she said, handling the rifle with surprising competence. Henry taught me, said a woman alone should know how to defend herself. Henry was a wise man. In some ways, she sighted down the barrel, squeezed the trigger. The shot hit close to center. But he never taught me to hit what I aim at, just to make noise, scare trouble away. Sometimes trouble doesn't scare. Then I'd better learn to shoot straight. She was a quick study, determined and focused. Clara watched from a safe distance, unusually quiet. The child had sensed the change in atmosphere, the way her parents moved with careful alertness. Calvan appeared twice more that week, once at a distance, watching from a ridge while Elias worked the fence line. Once in town, where Martha had gone for supplies. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just watched with those prison-hollow eyes. "Mrs. Boone," Tom Morrison said, intercepting Martha outside the Mercantile. "Heard you had a visitor out your way." "Calvin Rowe," she confirmed. "Elias knows him from years back. I remember the case, before my time as marshal. But people still talk." Morrison's face was grim. "Man's got reason to hold a grudge, but that don't give him right to threaten folks. You need help, you ask. We're managing." "No doubt, but Boone's not alone anymore. Remember that." It was Clara who saw him first the night everything changed. She'd gotten up for water, padding to the window in her nightgown. "Papa?" she whispered, voice tight with fear. "There's someone by the barn." Elias was moving before she finished speaking, rifle in hand. Through the window, he could see a figure near the barn door. Then another. Calvin had brought help. "Martha, take Clara to the root cellar," he said quietly. "Bar the door. Don't come out until I say, 'Elias, please.'" She gathered Clara without argument, but paused at the cellar door. "Don't you dare get yourself killed. Elias Boone, we just got you." Then they were gone, hidden beneath the floor, and Elias was alone with the night and the men who'd come to settle old scores. He slipped out the back, moving silent as he'd learned in decades of solitary hunting. The moon was new. Darkness his ally. He could hear them now. 3 voices, maybe 4. Calvin and men desperate enough or bitter enough to follow him. "Take what's valuable. Burn the rest," Calvin was saying. "Man needs to know what loss feels like." "What about the woman and kid?" another voice asked. "Them too, if necessary. Boone took my family. Seems fair." Elias stepped out of the shadows, rifle raised. "That's far enough." They spun, Calvin's hand going to his gun. But Elias had chosen his position well. Cover at his back, clear sight lines. "Should have minded your own business then," Calvin said. "Should mind it now. Walk away. Boone, take your family and go. Leave me the ranch and we're even." "Can't do that. Then you'll lose everything, just like I did." "No," Elias said quietly. "I won't." The standoff stretched taut. 4 men, all armed, all waiting for someone to make the first move. In the old days, Elias would have been calculating odds, planning his shots. Now all he could think about was Martha and Clara huddled in the cellar, depending on him. "You've gone soft," Calvin observed. "The old Boone would have started shooting by now. But you've got something to protect. Makes a man vulnerable. Makes a man dangerous," Elias corrected. "You want to walk away. Now's the time. Take your men and go. Find somewhere else to start over. Prison's behind you. Don't put it ahead of you again." Pretty words. "You learned those from your pretty wife?" Calvin's voice turned ugly. "Maybe after we're done with you, I'll ask her myself." The rage that flooded Elias was cold, focused. "You threaten my family again, and 20 years will seem like mercy compared to what I'll do. Your family." Calvin spat the words. "You know what I told my boys about family, that it was something other men got to keep, that their daddy was gone because Elias Boone decided to play lawman. You decided to steal cattle. You decided to shoot at folks. You decided to put your wants above the law." Elias kept his voice level. "I'm sorry about your boys. Sorry about your wife. But you made your choices. And now I'm making another one." Calvin went for his gun. Fast for a man 20 years out of practice, but not fast enough. Elias shot him in the shoulder, the same shoulder as 20 years ago, spinning him to the ground. The other men froze, suddenly leaderless. "Anyone else?" Elias asked. "Rifle steady." They looked at Calvin writhing on the ground, at the armed man who'd put him there without killing him, and made the smart choice. Hands raised, backing away, mounting their horses and riding off without their leader. Elias approached Calvin carefully, kicking the dropped gun away. The man lay clutching his shoulder, face twisted in pain and something else. Defeat, maybe, or recognition. "You could have killed me," Calvin gasped. "Clean shot. Why didn't you?" "Because I'm not who I was 20 years ago." Elias said, "And neither are you. You're just a broken man holding on to old hate because it's all you've got left. What else is there? Whatever you choose to build, same as anyone." He knelt, checking the wound. "This'll need tending. I'll get you to town, to the dock. After that, it's up to you. Stay and face charges for tonight. Or move on and find something better than revenge." "Why?" Calvin's eyes searched his face. Why show mercy now? Elias thought of Clara's arms around his neck, of Martha's smile in the morning light, of the life they were building together. "Because I've learned what's worth fighting for and what isn't." He helped Calvin to his feet, supporting him to the house. Martha emerged from the cellar at his call, Clara clinging to her hand. They took in the scene, Calvin wounded but alive, Elias unharmed, the night's danger passing. "I'll take him to town." Elias said, "Fetch the doctor." "I'll come with you," Martha said. "No, stay with Clara. Keep the rifle handy in case those others think to come back." He met her eyes. "I'll be home soon." She nodded, understanding all he couldn't say in front of Calvin. "Be careful." The ride to town was silent, except for Calvin's labored breathing. At the doctor's, Elias helped him inside, then waited while the wound was cleaned and bandaged. "He'll live," Doc Morrison said, no relation to the marshal. "Shoulder's a mess, but he'll heal." "You pressing charges?" Elias looked at Calvin, gray-faced with pain, but listening. "That's up to him, whether he wants to keep carrying old weight or set it down." Calvin closed his eyes. When he opened them, some of the bitter fire had dimmed. "I'm tired. Boone, 20 years of hate is heavy to carry." "Then put it down." "Simple as that?" "No, but it's a start." Tom Morrison arrived, summoned by the doctor. He took statements, assessed the situation with a lawman's careful eye. "Your call, Boone," he said finally. "Man threatened your family. Came armed to your property. That's enough for charges." "What do you want to do, Calvin?" Elias asked. Calvin was quiet for a long moment. "I want to disappear. Head south, maybe Mexico. Somewhere the name Calvin Rowe doesn't mean anything." He met Elias's eyes. "I'm done here." Morrison nodded. "I'll give you 3 days. After that, if you're still in my territory, we do this official." It was more grace than the law required, but Morrison was that kind of lawman. Calvin would leave. Elias knew. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by something that might, given time, become peace. The ride home was peaceful, stars brilliant overhead. Elias thought about circles, about how actions rippled outward like stones in water, touching shores years distant. He thought about mercy, harder to give than judgment, but ultimately more powerful. Martha was waiting on the porch, rifle across her lap. When she saw him, the relief on her face made his heart clench. "It's done," he said, dismounting. "He's leaving. It's over." She set aside the rifle, came to him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "Are you all right?" "I am now." They stood there in the starlight, holding each other, the simple miracle of surviving another threat to their fragile new happiness. Inside, Clara slept, safe and unaware of how close violence had come. "You didn't kill him," Martha observed. "No. The old Elias might have. The one who lived alone, had nothing to lose. The old Elias is gone," he said into her hair. "You and Clara saw to that." "Good. I like the new one better." She pulled back to look at him. "He's brave in different ways, harder ways. Martha, I need you to know, if anything happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," she said fiercely. "I won't allow it. Clara needs her papa. I need my husband." Husband. The word still sent warmth through him. "Just the same. The ranch is in both our names now. Papers are in town, filed proper. You and Clara will be taken care of. Elias Boone, you listen to me." Her hands framed his face. "We're not planning for you to leave us. We're planning to grow old together, to watch Clara grow up, to build a life together. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now come inside. Your family's waiting." As they entered the cabin, their home, Elias felt the last of the night's tension drain away. Calvin Rowe was part of the past now. A ghost lay to rest. What remained was this: a warm cabin, a sleeping child, a woman who'd chosen to stand beside him. He'd spent 50 years believing he was meant to be alone. It had taken a knock on the door during a rainstorm to prove him wrong. Had taken Martha's quiet strength and Clara's innocent trust to show him that some men weren't meant to be alone. They just needed the right people to be alone with. As he checked the locks one last time, Martha lighting the lamp for bed, Elias allowed himself a moment of pure gratitude for second chances, for the courage to take them, for the family that had made him whole outside. The wind sang through the pines, carrying away the last echoes of old pain. Inside, love grew quiet and steady as a banked fire, ready to warm them through whatever winters might come. The night Calvin returned was the kind that made walls creak and windows rattle, wind howling down from the mountains like something alive and angry. Elias woke to the sound of horses, too many horses for honest travel at this hour. He'd been expecting this, some part of him, ever since word came from town that Calvin hadn't gone to Mexico after all, that he'd been seen in saloons, gathering men with grudges and empty pockets, making promises about easy wealth at the Boone Ranch. "Martha," he whispered, already reaching for his rifle. "Wake Clara, quietly." She came awake instantly, mother's instinct reading danger in his tone. They'd drilled this, what to do if trouble came calling. She slipped from bed without questions, gathering Clara while Elias checked the windows. 5 riders, maybe 6. They'd learned from last time, spreading out, taking positions, professional. Calvin had spent his recovery time well. "Papa?" Clara's voice was small, drowsy with sleep but sharpening with fear. "It's all right, little miss," he said, kneeling beside her. "Remember what we practiced? You and Mama are going to play the hiding game. The bad men came back? Maybe, but I won't let them hurt you. Promise." She wrapped her arms around his neck, fierce and trusting. "Be careful, Papa. You promised you wouldn't leave." "I keep my promises." Martha had gathered what they needed: water, blankets, the small pistol Elias had taught her to use. Her face was pale, but determined in the lamplight. "There's more of them this time," she said quietly. "I know. Elias, get to the cellar. Bar the door. No matter what you hear, don't come out until I say, and if—" He swallowed hard. "If I don't come, you wait for daylight, then get to town. Morrison will help." "You'll come," she said fiercely. "You have to?" He kissed her forehead. Then Clara's, "Go!" They disappeared into the cellar, the heavy bar sliding into place, alone now. Elias could focus on what needed doing. He blew out the lamp, letting darkness fill the cabin. Let them wonder if anyone was awake, aware. Let them make the first move. He didn't have to wait long. "Boone!" Calvin's voice carried on the wind. "I gave you a chance. Tried to leave. But seems like nobody wants to hire a convict. Nobody wants to give a man a second chance. Except you did, didn't you? Gave me mercy. Well, mercy's got a price." Elias stayed silent, reading the shadows, marking positions. 2 by the barn, 1 near the chicken coop, Calvin and another by the front gate. The 6th, if there was a 6th, he couldn't place. "Got to thinking," Calvin continued. "About what you said. About building something new. Hard to build without resources. Boone, so here's my offer. Half of everything you've got. Cash, cattle, whatever you've saved. Fair payment for 20 years. Then we're square." "And if I refuse?" Elias called back, giving them a position to focus on while he moved. "Then we take it all, and maybe your pretty wife finds out what it's like to be a widow twice over." The rage came cold and focused. These men thought he was soft, made vulnerable by love. They were half right. Love had changed him, but not the way they thought. "Counteroffer," Elias shouted, now from a different window. "You and your men ride off now, and I don't hunt down every last one of you like the rabid dogs you are." Harsh laughter from multiple throats. 6 against 1. Boone, you may be good, but you ain't that good. 6 then. He'd counted right. 6 men who'd chosen to follow Calvin's bitter road. 6 men between him and his family's safety. Won't be the first time I've faced bad odds, Elias said, checking his ammunition. 2 rifles, his pistol, Martha's shotgun. Enough, if he was careful, if he was lucky, if he was good enough. Last chance, Boone, open the door. Let us take what's fair. Come and take it. The night exploded. They came from 3 sides at once. Professional, but not professional enough. Elias had spent decades learning every shadow of his land, every angle of defense. The man by the chicken coop went down first, Elias's shot catching him mid-stride. The 2 by the barn dove for cover as he swung the rifle their way, their return fire splintering wood above his head. He moved, always moving, making them chase shadows. The cabin was built solid, logs thick enough to stop bullets, but windows were vulnerable. Glass shattered in the kitchen as someone got ambitious. Elias put a shot through the opening, heard a curse and scramble for better cover. "You're just making this harder," Calvin shouted. "Nobody has to die tonight. Then leave!" But they pressed closer, emboldened by numbers. Elias fell back, using the cabin's corners, making them come to him. His shoulder blazed where a splinter had caught him, blood seeping warm down his arm. No time to tend it. A rush at the back door. Elias met it with a shotgun, the blast enormous in the enclosed space. A man screamed, fell back. 4 left, maybe 5, but they were learning, coordinating better. "The woman and kid," someone shouted. "Check the bedroom." Fear lanced through him. They didn't know about the cellar, were focused on the obvious hiding spots. But if they searched thoroughly, he had to end this. Had to push them back before they found his family. Decision made. Elias did what they wouldn't expect. He attacked, bursting from the front door, rifles spitting fire. He caught them flat-footed. 1 man spun and dropped. Another dove behind the water trough, bullets chasing him. Elias rolled behind the porch steps as return fire erupted, Calvin's voice rising above the chaos. "Get him! He's in the open!" But Elias was already moving, using the darkness and their muzzle flashes to track positions. The man behind the trough tried to shift positions. Mistake. Elias's shot was true, dropping him mid-movement. 3 left, Calvin and 2 others, spreading out, trying to flank. His rifle was empty. No time to reload. Pistol then. 6 shots. 3 men. The math was simple and unforgiving. "You always were stubborn," Calvin called, closer now, moving through the shadows toward the porch. "Could never just let things be. Learned from the best." Elias replied, marking Calvin's position by his voice. "You never knew when to quit either. Difference is, I've got nothing left to lose. That's where you're wrong." Elias rose, pistol tracking to where Calvin should be. But Calvin had learned too. 20 years of prison teaching patience. He'd waited, let Elias commit, and now his gun was rising. Hammer back, the moment stretching like molten glass. The shot was impossibly loud. But it wasn't Calvin's gun or Elias's. From the corner of the cabin, Tom Morrison stepped into view, his rifle still smoking. Calvin crumpled, gun spinning from nerveless fingers. "Evening, Boone," Morrison said conversationally. "Heard you might have trouble." The 2 remaining men, seeing their leader fall and the marshal's star gleaming in the moonlight, made the smart choice. Hands raised, weapons dropped, the fight draining out of them like water from a broken bucket. "Took your time," Elias managed, legs suddenly shaky as the danger passed. "Had to gather a posse. These boys hit the Hendricks place on their way here, stole horses. Federal crime. That." Morrison's expression was grim. "Calvin alive?" Elias knelt beside the fallen man, still breathing, gut shot but conscious. Their eyes met in the darkness. "Should have gone to Mexico," Elias said quietly. "Should have done a lot of things different." Calvin's voice was weak, fading. "You were right, Boone. about choosing what to build. I just couldn't let go of what I'd lost. I know. Your family. They safe. Yes. Good. That's good. His eyes shifted to Morrison. Tell my boys, if anyone knows where they are, tell them their PA was a fool. But he loved them. Tell them to be better men than me. Morrison nodded. I'll see it done. Calvin's breathing grew labored. 20 years. Boone, 20 years of hate. What a waste. It's done now, Elias said. Let it go. And Calvin did. The bitter fire finally fading from his eyes as dawn touched the horizon. The posse took the survivors. Morrison efficient in establishing order. Doc Morrison was summoned for the wounded. Statements taken. The machinery of law grinding into motion. You'll need to come to town, Morrison said. Formalities, but it's clear self-defense. These men came looking for trouble. My family. Go to them. Come to town when you're ready. This mess isn't going anywhere. Elias found them in the cellar, Martha clutching the pistol with white knuckles. Clara curled against her side. When the bar lifted and light flooded in, Martha's composure cracked. Elias, oh God, you're hurt. It's nothing. Scratch. He gathered them both in his arms, feeling them solid and real and alive. It's over. Really over this time. Papa, you're bleeding, Clara said, small fingers finding the wound on his shoulder. Just a little. Your mama will fix it right up. They emerged into dawn light, taking in the scene, bodies covered with blankets. Morrison's men cleaning up the aftermath of violence. Martha's face was grave as she surveyed it all. This is what you protected us from, she said quietly. This is what we protected each other from, he corrected. You kept Clara safe, held the cellar, did what needed doing. I was terrified. So was I. He pulled her close with his good arm. But we're here. We're whole. That's what matters. Morrison approached, hat in hand. Mrs. Boone, Clara, sorry you had to endure this, but your husband's a brave man, faced down 6 armed men to keep you safe. 7, Martha said, looking at Elias with something fierce and proud in her eyes. He faced down 7 men. Calvin came here twice. The first time, Elias gave him mercy. That took more courage than any gunfight. Morrison considered this. Reckon you're right. Mercy's harder than justice, most times. As the posse prepared to leave, taking their prisoners and their grim cargo, Doc Morrison tended Elias's shoulder. Surface wound, as he'd thought. Painful, but not dangerous. You're lucky, the doctor said, wrapping the bandage. Yes, Elias agreed. But he wasn't looking at his shoulder. He was watching Martha make coffee with steady hands. Clara feeding the chickens as if armed men hadn't just tried to destroy their world. Very lucky. Later, after statements were given and the law satisfied, after the blood was scrubbed from the floorboards and the broken glass swept away, the 3 of them sat on the porch watching the sunset. Will more bad men come? Clara asked, nestled between her parents. No, sweetheart, Martha said. That's all done now. How do you know? Elias considered how to explain. You know how sometimes you have a splinter, and it hurts until you pull it out. Clara nodded. Calvin was like an old splinter, been festering for 20 years. Now it's out. It hurt coming out, but now it can heal clean. Oh, Clara digested this. Papa? Yes? You were very brave, but I'm glad, mister. Morrison came to help. Even brave people need help sometimes. Right. That's right, little miss. Even brave people need help. Especially brave people, Martha added, linking her arm through his. Because they're usually too stubborn to ask for it. As darkness settled over their valley, peaceful now, Elias reflected on the night's lessons. He'd spent 30 years believing strength meant standing alone, but tonight had proven different. Strength was Morrison arriving when needed. Strength was Martha holding the cellar, protecting Clara. Strength was knowing when to fight and when to accept help. No man's an island, he murmured. What's that? Martha asked. Something I read once. Didn't understand it then. He pulled his family closer. I do now. They sat together as stars emerged, the ranch peaceful around them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, repairs to make, a trip to town, the slow work of moving past violence. But tonight, they were together, safe, whole. The sound of Clara's breathing deepened as she dozed against his side. Martha hummed softly, some melody from her childhood. Elias let their peace wash over him, understanding finally that courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was being afraid and standing firm anyway. It was opening your door to strangers in storms. It was choosing mercy over revenge. It was learning to accept love after decades of solitude. It was knowing that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary, and more importantly, worth living for. As he carried Clara inside, Martha beside him, Elias Boone knew he was the richest man in Montana Territory, not in gold or cattle or land, but in the currency that truly mattered: love freely given, trust earned through trial, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The cabin door closed behind them, shutting out the night and sealing in the warmth. Home, family, everything he'd never known he needed, everything he'd fight to keep until his last breath. Outside, wind sang through the pines, carrying away the last echoes of violence, leaving only peace in its wake. Spring came early that year, melting snow revealing green shoots eager for sun. Elias stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching Martha work in her new garden. She'd claimed a patch of earth near the house, coaxing life from soil that had known only wild grass for decades. Clara helped, small hands patting seeds into furrows, chattering about the flowers and vegetables they'd have come summer. 6 months had passed since Calvin's last visit. 6 months of peace, of building, of learning what it meant to be a family. The scars remained, a puckered line on Elias's shoulder, boards in the wall that were newer than the rest, but they'd faded into the larger story of their life together. "Papa, look!" Clara ran to him, dirt smudged on her cheek. "Mama says we can plant sunflowers, tall ones that'll grow higher than me. Higher than the cabin if we're not careful," he said, setting down his cup to lift her up. She'd grown in these months, no longer the frightened waif who'd appeared in the rain, but a vibrant child secure in love. Really? That tall? Well, maybe not quite, but tall enough to make the chickens jealous. She giggled, the sound still capable of warming places in his heart he'd thought frozen forever. Chickens don't get jealous. "Papa, you haven't met Rosie on a bad day." Martha joined them, brushing soil from her hands. "The potatoes are in, carrots next. Then the herbs. We'll have a proper garden by summer. First garden I've had since I was a boy." Elias admitted. "Ma kept one, back in Missouri. Haven't thought about it in years." "You never talk about Missouri," Martha observed gently. "Not much to tell. Parents died when I was 17. Fever took them both same winter. Sold the farm. Headed west." He shifted Clara to his other arm. "Figured I was looking for gold or cattle or adventure. Took me 30 years to realize I was looking for home." "And did you find it?" He looked at his wife, his daughter, his land stretching peaceful under spring sun. "I did, just took a while to recognize it." A rider appeared on the horizon. Moving easy, no threat in the approach. As the figure drew closer, Elias recognized Tom Morrison's distinctive seat. "Marshall's coming," he said, old wariness stirring. But Morrison was smiling as he dismounted, accepting Martha's offer of coffee with genuine pleasure. "Not official business," he assured them, seeing Elias's tension. "Good news. Actually, couple of things. First, that teaching position in town, school board finally approved funding. They'd like to offer it to you. Mrs. Boone." Martha's eyes widened. "The teaching position? But I'm not formally trained. You can read, write, and cipher. You've been teaching Clara. That's more than half the kids in town get at home. Plus," Morrison grinned, "Mrs. Patterson's been singing your praises. Says any woman who can civilize Elias Boone can certainly handle a classroom of youngsters. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. Term starts in fall, gives you time to prepare." Morrison turned to Elias. "Which brings me to the second thing. If Martha's teaching in town, you'll need reliable transportation. Joe Henley's got a buggy for sale. Good condition. Thought you might be interested. A buggy. For trips to town. For Martha's work. For Clara's education. Another step away from isolated existence toward connected life. We'll look at it, Elias said. Thanks for letting us know. Morrison finished his coffee. Talked about town news and territorial politics. Then took his leave. As dust settled behind him, Martha stood quiet, contemplating. What are you thinking? Elias asked. About change, about possibilities. She met his eyes. Would it bother you? Me working in town, being away during school days. Bother me? He considered. Would have once. The thought of anyone coming and going, disrupting the quiet. But now, he gestured at the garden, the improved cabin, Clara's toys scattered on the porch. Now I figure quiet's overrated. I want to do it, she said suddenly. I want to teach, to give Clara and other children what Henry would have given them. Love of learning, of books, of possibilities beyond these valleys. Then you should. Just like that? Just like that. Martha, you've given me a life I never dreamed of. Least I can do is support your dreams. She kissed him then, there in the morning sun with Clara laughing and clapping at her parents' display of affection. The buggy, when they saw it, was perfect, sturdy but comfortable, with room for 3 and supplies. Clara proclaimed it the finest carriage in the territory, though it was simply practical. But then, Elias reflected, practical things often held the most beauty when seen through loving eyes. Summer arrived in full glory. The garden thrived under Martha's care, producing vegetables that graced their table and enough extra to trade in town. Clara grew brown as a berry, helping with chores, learning her letters, bringing home an endless parade of creatures that needed temporary sanctuary. Injured birds, orphaned rabbits, once a snake that sent Martha shrieking and Elias laughing until his sides hurt. It's not funny, Martha protested, though she was fighting a smile. It could have been poisonous. It was a garter snake, love, harmless as Clara's dolly. Well, it looked dangerous, all slithery. Love. The word had started slipping into their conversation, natural as breathing. Neither made grand declarations, that wasn't their way. But it was there in coffee brought without asking, in mended shirts and favorite meals, in the way they moved together through daily tasks like dancers who'd found their rhythm. One evening, as they sat watching sunset paint the mountains gold, Clara asleep against Elias's chest, Martha spoke quietly. I was so frightened that night in the rain. When I knocked on your door, I thought I was bringing Clara to another temporary shelter, another place to rest before moving on. And instead, I found home, found you. She leaned into his side. Do you ever think about if I hadn't knocked? If I'd passed by? Found somewhere else? Try not to, he admitted. That kind of thinking leads nowhere good. What matters is you did knock, and I opened the door. Your lonely rancher days truly over then? He pressed a kiss to her hair. Been over since the moment you walked in. Just took me a while to admit it. Fall brought new adventures. Martha began teaching, driving the buggy to town 3 days a week. The first day. Elias and Clara watched her go with matching expressions of worry. What if she likes town better? Clara asked in a small voice. What if she doesn't come back? She'll come back, Elias assured her, though the same fear had crossed his mind. Your mama's not the leaving kind, and besides, we're making stew tonight. She won't want to miss that. His attempted joke fell flat, but sure enough, come evening, the buggy appeared on the road. Martha climbed down, tired but glowing. How was it? Clara demanded, dancing around her mother. Wonderful, exhausting, chaotic. Martha hugged them both. 16 students, ages 6 to 14. I have so much to learn, but oh, the possibilities. She chattered through dinner about lesson plans and supplies needed, about children hungry for knowledge and others who'd need coaxing. Elias listened, content to let her voice fill the cabin. This new energy she brought home as welcome as morning sun. Winter arrived gentle that year, Snow falling soft and steady. The cabin, reinforced and improved through their combined efforts, stood warm against the cold. Evenings found them gathered by the fire, Martha preparing lessons, Clara practicing writing, Elias working leather or maintaining tools, but always together. "Papa," Clara said one such evening, "tell about when you were alone." "Why would you want to hear about that?" "Because it makes now seem better," she said with a child's simple wisdom. So he told them about silent suppers and cold mornings, about Christmases that passed unmarked and birthdays forgotten, about the weight of solitude he'd worn so long he'd forgotten he was carrying it. "But I wasn't really living," he concluded, "just existing, surviving seasons like an old bear, hibernating even in summer. Good thing we woke you up," Clara said, snuggling closer. "Best thing," he agreed. Spring returned, and with it a letter that would have once sent him into paralysis. An attorney in Missouri, settling estates, had found record of a small inheritance from a cousin Elias barely remembered. Not a fortune, but enough to add to their savings, to consider improvements, expansions, dreams. "What should we do with it?" Martha asked, practical as always. "What do you want?" "A real bedroom for Clara. Maybe expand the house a little." She paused. "And Elias, what would you think about more children?" The question hung between them, momentous and tender. They'd not discussed it, this possibility of growing their family beyond the miracle of Clara. "I'm 50 years old," he said carefully. "Bit old to be starting with babies." "Abraham was 100, she countered, then blushed. "Not that I'm comparing. Just, would you want that? Brothers or sisters for Clara?" He thought about noise and chaos, about more mouths to feed and bodies to clothe. Then he thought about Clara's laughter multiplied, about teaching another child to read, about Martha round with new life they'd created together. "I want whatever you want," he said honestly. "This life, this family, it's already more than I ever dreamed. If it grows, that's blessing upon blessing." She kissed him then. And if Clara hadn't chosen that moment to announce she'd definitely like a brother, but absolutely not a sister, the conversation might have continued quite differently. By summer, the house had grown. A proper bedroom for Clara, painted yellow at her insistence. A larger kitchen for Martha's increasing skill at feeding not just family but occasional guests, neighbors who stopped by, travelers seeking shelter. The community that had begun to form around them. And by fall, when Martha's figure began to show new curves, when her steps turned careful and her smile held secrets, Elias understood that his education in love was far from complete. "Are you scared?" she asked one night, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Terrified," he admitted. "I'm old to be starting this. What if—" "No what ifs," she interrupted. "We've faced worse than a baby. Elias Boone, storms and gunmen and starting over. This is joy coming." She was right, of course. When spring brought their son, loud, healthy, demanding, Elias discovered his heart could expand infinitely. Watching Clara crown herself big sister, seeing Martha nurse their child while humming soft melodies, he understood the final truth of his journey. He'd thought himself meant for solitude, built for isolation, but in truth, he'd simply been waiting for the right door to open, the right souls to enter, the right moment to step from mere survival into abundant life. Now, on another summer evening with his family gathered on the porch, Martha beside him, baby James in her arms, Clara reading aloud from her primer, Elias looked out over land that had once echoed with emptiness. The same mountains stood guard, the same creek ran its course, but everything had transformed. The garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers. Laundry danced on the line. Children's laughter rang where silence had reigned. The cabin had become a home. The house had become full. And the man who'd thought himself destined for loneliness had discovered the truth. Love wasn't a lightning strike or a fever dream. It was a door opening in a storm, a hand reaching out in trust, a choice made daily to build rather than simply endure. It was Martha's smile over morning coffee, and Clara's arms around his neck, and James's tiny fingers gripping his calloused thumb. "What are you thinking?" Martha asked, noticing his distant gaze. "About doors," he said. "About rain, about the best decision I ever made." Which was, he pulled his family closer, feeling the weight of them against his side, precious and real in his opening the door, letting you in, letting myself out. "Papa's being poetic again," Clara announced. "That means he's happy." "Is that so, little miss?" "Yep, you only talk fancy when your heart's full." "You told me so," out of the mouths of babes. Again, his heart was full, fuller than he'd known hearts could be. The lonely rancher who'd reached 50 without knowing woman's touch or child's laughter had discovered the secret. Some men weren't meant to be alone. They were meant to be patient, to endure their seasons of solitude, to keep their doors strong but ready to open when love finally came knocking. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, as his son slept peaceful and his daughter read brave and his wife leaned warm against his side, Elias Boone offered a prayer of gratitude to whatever power had sent that storm, that knock, that beginning of everything. He'd waited 50 years to start living. Now, surrounded by love he'd never thought to find, he understood it had been worth every lonely moment to arrive at this. Home, family, the life that begins when a door opens in the rain and a man finds courage to say, "Come in." The rest, as they say in all the best stories, was happiness. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening while driving through the countryside, relaxing at home, or perhaps during your daily commute? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Elias and Martha's journey in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to us, and I can't wait to hear what touched your heart in this story of love finding its way to even the loneliest of souls.